Hey,
Howdy, everybody. I want to welcome you all back to episode 156 of the Subjective Perspective Show here on Be Awoke Entertainment. And you see our guest with us right here. I'm going to give a bit of an intro, though we'll get into our featured guest for episode 156, an individual who we're ecstatic to have on the show. Been reading his book, pot.com. Must read. I believe it's dropping for the world in about a week or so. So we'll get into that. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at him. For those that are not able to look, you're listening to this on any one of the streaming platforms. We're honored to have Crash Taylor with us on March 18th, 2022. I was just saying to Crash prior. We've been doing this since 2013, Crash. And we got into this by accident. Some good people out there, actually in Brooklyn, put us on to their old network, and then that all evolved to what we've been doing. With all that said, ladies and gentlemen, Crash is an author. We're going to explore his book pot.com today, as well as a musician who just released some music and outstanding music by Crash Taylor. So everybody listening in, watching this, you just know by the end of this episode, you're going to have all the contact info where you can get your hands and your ears and eyes feasted on the beautiful art by Crash Taylor. Crash, thank you for being on with us.
thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Stoked to have you.
Great to be here.
Really, I mean, when you think of artists and when you think of individuals who really have a history, you're somebody with that. You're somebody who just reading your book, I think I was just reading up to the part of, oh gosh, we'll get into it. I won't try to rack my brain right now, but getting there towards the end of the mid to end portion of the book. I just received it maybe about 2 weeks ago, and so I'm a slow reader, though. It's because I read for meaning. That's the reason, ladies and gentlemen. Slow readers aren't bad readers. Slow readers are people who read for meaning. And also for those watching the video, I nicked myself with a razor that got a little just irritated. So now it's just scabbing. So thank you all for being cool about that. Not to freak everybody on out, but long story with that. Do a little research. Make sure on those razors. Make sure those razors are clean. Long story. I used the wrong razor. I was using a razor that I was shaving my new tattoo that my good buddy Mikey Archuleta up there, Modesto, did for me, and picked up the wrong one. Running around, yada yada. Irritated the skin. Things happened. So thank you all for the visual who are watching. For those listening, hey, again, I wouldn't have had to say it whatsoever. Though, hey, just know it's a little bit of info. Make sure those razors are good, y'all. Crash, what I'd also like to mention is that, this episode, for everybody listening in at beawoke.com, that's beawoke.com, and you can go to our archive section where you can find 155 episodes. Crash's episode, as you all know, will be up for about a month until we have our next featured episode, and then it will be stored in our awesome archive section for forever, 24/7 access. Of course, on all the big streaming services like the Spotify's and the Apple, I think Apple iTunes, no, Apple Podcasts now it is. Crash, you know how that can be sometimes, but you have a history with technology too. So I'd like to get into all of this. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us get into our interview with Crash Taylor. Crash, again, thank you so much for being on with us. And I mentioned beforehand, I didn't want to ask you many questions prior because I want this to be organic. And for everybody listening in who checks us on out, now I'm somebody who likes to go as deep as you'd like to go within the thought process. So have a fun time with this. Okay.
Good. That's
So
perfect.
first question I ask everybody, Crash, where were you born and raised?
Well, the only place in the universe you can find chocolate that we know of here, planet Earth, and raised pretty much by, I guess, what you'd call hippies now, although, they didn't use drugs and stuff, but very musical family. We made our own, clothes, and ate crunchy food before most people knew where to buy, healthy food and stuff. Yeah, pretty much raised on music though.
Now, time period that you're saying, that you're sort of referring to, you said your family were sort of the hippies. So we're talking 1960s. So,
Yes, 70s.
So 1970s or so. And
I don't think they're, we call them hippies in the 60s, but they hadn't really figured it out yet. Not that the hippies ever did figure out who they are, but I think if you had any consciousness about race and environment and ate healthy food and, sent your kids to school in clothes that you made, you're a hippie.
That's great. And, and so you're out of New York. I just want to make sure I'm right.
Yeah.
New York City.
Greenwich Village, baby.
Greenwich Village. Now, for everybody listening in, Crash, you gotta please enlighten our audience. For those who are listening in, we have people who listen from every continent. Haven't seen Antarctica on our data just yet. So
Okay.
I always make the point. Listen, one day get out to Antarctica, and I'll just at least throw a podcast up, or at least just zoom on in or something like that, just so it shows, hey, we had somebody down there. But we have a lot of people who may not know what, the intricacies of New York are like. What was it like before now? What was it like when you were growing up there?
Well, first thing to know is Greenwich Village, even though it's in Manhattan, most of the buildings are only a couple stories high. So it's quite often, it might be snowing in the village and you get on a subway and go to Midtown and it's raining. And because of the lower buildings, it feels a little different. It feels like a village, kind of. And also sort of in the 50s and the 60s, that's where the beat poets sort of gathered, and the first sort of homosexual pride built up. So there was this really interesting melting pot in the 60s going into the 70s, and kind of by the time the 80s came around, it was a free-for-all because everybody was sort of freely exercising whatever subculture freedoms they were interested in, and it was a really dynamic place.
Now, New York City, I'm just going to my mixer here, making sure my sound is as pristine as it can be. And for those listening in, yes, New York City is one of the biggest cities on the planet, one of the most densely populated cities. I've crashed, I don't know, I think it's about 2 miles east to west in New York City. I could be wrong, maybe a little more.
Yeah.
Going north to south, if you go all the way up the 6 train, just before you get over to the Bronx, where I used to reside, back in 2004-ish to 2010 or so. And right over there in Pelham Bay, just before the second to last stop on the 6, I don't know, a couple miles north to south, but you have a whole lot of people. I think now it's like 11 million people, 11.5, something like that. I think when I was growing up, I'm in my mid 40s, sort of.
Yeah.
The end of this, actually, first big, massive birthday to my grandma, March 12th. That was her birthday. I'm March 31st. So Cesar Chavez shares the same birthday as myself.
Nice.
A couple other people out there I won't start spouting out, but it always sticks with me when I think of Cesar Chavez. And, it's just one of those things, when you start to think about what the time period is like for, the city of New York. Like I was sort of referring to, I'm in my mid 40s. I saw New York sort of evolve and change a bit, but so many people, they were always there. Is there a big difference, Crash, between the New York City you saw growing up to maybe 17, 16, 17, to the world you're living in New York City now?
Yeah. Well, it seemed like there was a big rush of money in the 90s. And there was a time when you could graduate high school, wait tables 3 nights a week, and have a storefront on the Lower East Side and bang out your metalwork or be a painter or a photographer. And a lot of my friends did that, and they were able to really contribute to the cultural aspect and the diversity of New York, which always I found so exciting. And that's what
Yeah,
gave me the energy to
totally.
go out there in the world.
The museums are just, but we'll get to
Yeah.
that in a little bit. Sorry, apologize.
Yeah, and the nightclubs and the whole thing. So the prices going up made it much harder for freaks to exist. So it got a little more boring. And then I think the other thing that happened is marketers became more successful in that, when I was growing up, you go to a nightclub and there'd be, Puerto Ricans and cut off t-shirts and drag queens and bridge and tunnel people and rocker, like all kind of wigging out in the same space. Or there's a lot of crossover. And now it's like the marketers are so specific, you want this kind of music, you go here, or if you're a 30-year-old, this kind of person, you go there. And if you're single, you go there. And it's kind of made it a little less fun.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's the way it's being marketed. It's
Yeah.
the branding aspects, all of the science of marketing and advertising that we've seen evolve since the early 20th century, though seeing it right now, seeing with the early banking industry, obviously oil, or the cigars and tobacco industry, and the way the marketing was being approached, to now, like you said, is super interesting, because I think you mentioned the tunnel, West 27th, right there on the West Side Highway. Spent a couple years there, and super. Now we're in the late 90s at this point for myself, and just like you said, it brought such a diverse group of people. It's why I am the way I am. I met people from all over the world, all different paradigms, aspects of who they were, and in the end, it was a quote I read by Desmond Tutu. He said, "A person is a person who sees others as persons." Now, I'm living a life of just immersed in diversity, right? Where everybody's just on the same wavelength. And you know who also mentioned something like this? Immortal Technique, hip hop artist, great hip hop artist out of Harlem, New York. Very, very well known in the hip hop world. But he just made the point, like back in the day, it was sort of like, if you could talk with us, if you could kick with us the way that you were able to, nothing else mattered. It was just that aspect of the communication, the way that we all interconnected. So that's a really good point, because nowadays, especially with the digital world, we live in that hyper focused marketing system where obviously data is mined and extracted, and that's why we all get specific advertisements. And that's fascinating that you say that. What is it, Crash? Do you think that the world, right, not just New York City right now, but stretching out across the planet, what's your view on technology? Is technology something like Einstein made the point of, not to throw these quotes out, but just another interesting one. He said,
let's just take it a step back in terms of marketing and tribes and social identification. I think we can really go back to like the mango tree, right? If I'm chilling on a mango tree with my crew, and we all self-identify as a crew, and our mangoes are ripe, and somebody else comes along, some other crew wants the mangoes, there's probably going to be a brawl, right? So we sort of identify around scarce resources, and we've learned, all of our biases are, security oriented. We want to make ourselves feel safe, so we identify with people like us. And while that may give us personal security in some cases, what that does is it tends to make us very closed-minded about the world, so that we think we can only communicate with certain kinds of people, or we get tripped up with verbal lexicons in terms of which words, oh, I use this word, I'm in this crew, or that's old word, or this is a new word, or I think I think that's where it kind of all begins, the separation. And the marketers have just gotten really good at sort of recognizing how to tap different self-identified groups to motivate them to, like their products, or to continue to deeper self-identify. And in terms of technology, I find myself odd man out at almost every party. And sometimes people actually get really mad at me because I see technology, I have an irrational propensity towards joy and optimism. So, forgive me, but I think all of this communication that's coming along is going to allow us to build a different social structure. Peter Hawken talks about this in one of his books, where it's sort of, instead of hierarchy, political organization, how humans manage our relationships, we'll go from a dogmatic sort of tight pyramid or looser pyramid, democracy, tighter pyramid, dictatorship, into sort of a blobular biological structure, to where people can sort of step up and solve problems for themselves, because we can now communicate and motivate each other to get involved. And we see a lot of that happening, in the social movements today.
Oh, fascinating. Yes. And I want to, touch base with what you were just about to say about the social movements. Also, though, I was going to get that quote out, which sort of, maybe counters what you were saying, but I got to put it out there because it's an interesting one. Einstein once said, within a letter, I believe he penned to Harry S. Truman before they were going to drop the atomic bombs. I think he was on Peconic Bay in Long Island, actually, over by Riverhead over out there. He said, in just a one-liner I'm going to throw out there, mankind's technology has far surpassed mankind's humanity. So, yes, I'm sure that could be interpreted many of ways, in terms of, yes, there's some things with technology that, hey, maybe we should reel back a bit there. Though, like you're making the point, Crash, there's something right now happening. Graham Hancock talked about this on our show also. Graham, just a brilliant fella. Definitely got to reach on out to him to get him on back, because I was just talking about that with another guest, actually, Crash. So now that I mentioned it twice, I'm doing this later on. But he said that there's a new form of communication being forged. And to your points, a bit more elaborate in terms of the detail of what you're giving. And thank you for that, because to understand that there are social systems, well, I'll say this, I'll say patterns of communication. Let's say patterns of communication that are established. Let's just take it from looking at the way we communicated utilizing a telephone back in the 1980s, cord to wall. You're listening, to the person on the other end. If we're lucky,
and as that technology revolutionized our communication, a lot of people were complaining that it didn't have the personal touch of a telegram or a letter, and that it was not a valuable social means for us to actually build a web.
That is great point, right? As we're getting older, generations say, oh, that music those kids are listening to, right? That darned music, something along those lines, metaphorically. Though there's so much to be learned from the youth, as well as the youth learning from the elders, irrefutably. Now, you mentioned social awareness a bit earlier. The ideas of individuals who may, speak up and out for causes. And your book, pot.com, which we have displayed up here on our little furnace here, really is a story of you and what was going on in your lifetime in New York City, in Greenwich Village,
Well,
and
well,
a
it's
crazy
interesting.
wild story.
You mentioned Cesar Chavez. I am a big fan. He did really important work. And my father, at one point when he, found out I was involved in a criminal enterprise, he said, it's not that you're not on the right side of the argument, but it could be a better cause. So, working to legalize marijuana and making sure people had marijuana to smoke, I realized isn't sort of the highest calling, but there was at that time a sort of a flag waving bravado of, the establishment is wrong on this issue, and we're going to go ahead and do what we want. And what's interesting, because Greenwich Village was such a potpourri of subcultures, expressing themselves in different ways, the punks and the homosexual community, and just everybody just kind of blowing up. Nobody thought anything of marijuana, right? So as I grew up, I was already sort of living in the world that the laws are catching up with now, because it was accepted, and there were people who didn't do harder drugs that used it, and it was sort of cross cultural bond that pot smokers had. I mean, there's no greater way to walk into a party and light a joint. And maybe you're only going to meet pot smokers, but immediately you're meeting lots of different kinds of people, bankers and street kids, and there's a camaraderie there that sort of charged my bravado to live the life, take the ride that I took.
Now, I'd like to explore this ride, Crash. You take this any direction you'd like. I'll throw a couple questions out there without giving away all of the information within the book. Okay, so that's why I there's a couple pieces that when I remember what I was reading before about, I think it's Sheep's Pasture out there in Central Park.
Sheep's Meadow, yeah.
Sheep's Meadow, thank you. And I do like that area. I remember just spending a lot of years there, not far from West 72nd, right there, Strawberry Fields. And just for everybody listening in, it's a beautiful area of New York City. Get on out to Sheep's Meadow. It is. That's right. I say Sheep's Pasture. That's right. Sheep's Meadow. And, you're talking about a time period in New York City, 1970s, I believe, is what you were making the point.
More 80s.
More 1980s, prior to mass consumption of the internet. The internet was just getting going. I want to say by 84, but sort of in a mainstream setup. But I know obviously through the military and the use of what they have.
Although surprisingly, 1991, I'd had a website for 2 years, and there was an article in the New York Times. NASA was discussing whether they needed a presence on the web. The freaking rocket scientists didn't get it.
So pot.com, and it's pot dot, the word dot, and dot, then the word com, just so everybody knows. Okay. And actually I won't reach back and I won't mess it. It
was a bit of a layout challenge. It's cool. Artist who designed the cover, she was just trying to make it work, and obviously it's a horrible Google search because pot dot whatever. So, but whatever. The article, the book is largely about how money from the marijuana trade entered into investment companies that really propelled, as well as a pretty serious whisper campaign that went on at the same time to get people interested in certain technologies.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great read. It's a read that's smooth. It's a read that is inspiring, exciting, and a story that you fall into where you're feeling like you're sort of on the journey with you. So that's what I'm on right now, and I totally dig it, Crash. It is an incredible book. So let's explore the book, and later on I'd like to explore a bit of the music as well, but I really want to explore the book. And now the book is dropping, I want to say March 25th. I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Next week.
Now people be able to get this on where will they be able to find this? What platforms?
Amazon for the first 3 months, and then it'll be available in stores if stores choose to pick it up after that. but
We got
Amazon
to
will
get
be the
them. We
easiest.
got to get these books sold. I didn't mean to jump in there, but I got to say, we got these books. Get these books sold, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, read pot.com and you know, take a breath of fresh air from what you may be immersed in right now within information. Yeah, just like Crash was saying, the marketing aspect of the way that we are all being conditioned is very specific to whatever we are already putting out there in our thought process on technology, whether it's saying, oh, I like to look at penguins, or I like to look at little kittens online, or whatever. I like to do traveling stuff. And you're gonna get that right back from the algorithms. So just know, let this be something that breaks up that monotony of the technological algorithm, and feel the pulse of your own waves. You know what I'm saying? Because every one of you have to be inspired in this life. And in order to feel good, I'm telling you, being inspired is one of those elements that I found makes me feel good. Even in times where I may not be feeling good, I always say to myself, oh, there's something going down. Oh, hey, we got this really cool podcast happening with Crash Taylor. Okay, cool. This is gonna be a cool next couple weeks. I'm thinking about that now, So, hey, listen, we're living a good life. We're feeling always inspired here. But you know how that can go, ladies and gents. So, you just get yourself this book, pot.com, and you're gonna feel it. So, Crash, my brother, this is where I'm gonna ask you just a couple different aspects of the book, and you take this any direction you like. And you already started off. This is about you and the marijuana trade in New York City early on, like you said, about the 1980s.
Yeah.
And whatever information you would like to relinquish and would like to expound upon based on what we've talked about, what's in the book, please take us any direction you'd like regarding what you were doing early on and how you got into the marijuana industry in the 1980s.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I always call, at least when I was more rebellious in my teenage years, I agree that marijuana is the gateway drug. For me, it was the gateway to the upper class. So, so I was raised by a single mom, wasn't a lot of money in the house. I went to a pretty intense high school. There were a bunch of wealthy kids there who liked to party. I was near Washington Square Park, which, there were people selling drugs there. So I kind of started riding the D train with a little package every day and making a little bit of money, and then getting invited to, Fire Island and the Hamptons and, sort of swanky parties because I was in the mix. And then one day I just got a call, friend of the family was like, I hear you're sort of dabbling, and if you're going to do that, you should really call so-and-so. So, basically at 15 years old, I walked out of Chelsea with 35 pounds, $500 cheaper than anybody else really in Manhattan could get it. So
how old were you there, Crash?
15.
15. Wow. And for Chelsea, everybody, this is the Lower West Side of Manhattan. I would say Lower West Side down by the end of 14th over there by Chelsea Piers. They have a skate park over there. I don't even know if it's there anymore, but I remember when it was being built, did a skate show over there, believe it or not. We'll talk about that down the road. You mentioned a couple of cool places. Fire Island, I used to work over at Davis Park. Okay. Nice. And cool story about that. David Amram, you mentioned Jack Kerouac. David Amram, good buddy of mine. Dave is just a great dude. And
I watched both Dave's shows on your podcast.
Man, so you know the story, so you got to hear him talking about Davis Park a bit. So that's why that's some cool stuff. And the Hamptons would be out in the Hamptons often. I mean, between New York City and the Hamptons, grew up in that.
Although in the 80s, the Hamptons weren't quite the Hamptons yet. There was the millionaire mansions, and the rest of it was rednecks.
Hey, now, so Dune Road is where you had a lot of stuff happening. And I used to, not to digress too deep, but some kids in my school, I was from Blue Point. Okay, so working class family, but you also got on the other side of the tracks big mansions and some people who had boats. And some of the kids I knew had boats. So we would take boats across. Actually, big shout out to Marcus. He owns Satellite Pizza out there. So if you're ever in Crash, if you're ever in that area and you're gonna head on out to Davis, maybe from Patchogue, or you're gonna go out to like Sailor's Haven, the Grove, any area that's just like having a beautiful time in Sable, then that would be go to Satellite Pizza. And if you see Marcus, you just tell him Nick, the trombone player, he knows me too from long back. Just tell him I said hi, okay? You never know. Maybe Marcus, give Crash a slice. I'll pay for it next time I see you. Okay, I'll stop in, man. So that's cool. So Crash, so all these areas I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But you're 15 in Chelsea. You're walking out with 35 pounds, I believe you said, of some of the. Now, for everybody listening in, obviously marijuana, for y'all that know, is legal now in New York. So this is when it was highly illegal, and with new laws that were not sure if it was the Rockefeller laws at the time, whatever the laws it was, that there would be serious consequences. So were you concerned? I'm just curious now that you look back, not looking back, but at the moment, were you worried? Were you like, oh, were you freaking out? Or were you just like, you just felt like this was going to be the way it was going to be?
Yeah, it felt pretty comfortable, actually. It was an interesting time because the village was such a freak show. I mean, if I was carrying a bale of weed, I would literally walk down the block with the police station, cop shop, because I would feel safer.
Wow.
They were there to protect me, right?
Yes.
Like, I couldn't have done what I did without.
That's an amazing viewpoint. But listen, rather than getting mugged, right? Rather than getting what you just bought stolen, but on top of that, getting hurt, right?
Yeah.
It's a mix. Right? That you just saw it in a way that worked, and it worked where you were able to now bring marijuana from the New York City area all through Long Island, like you just mentioned, from Fire Island to the Hamptons, and anywhere else where you go into South Philly, Connecticut, or upstate, in any other regions?
Yeah, definitely, at least the entire tri-state area, because most of the kids came to the city to connect. And when all my friends started going to college and they met people at colleges, I got more and more introductions, and it was definitely not an industry. You didn't need any marketing. There was plenty of word of mouth, to make stuff happen. So there was always concern that somebody would make a mistake. I mean, certainly in the beginning years, I was like, I just don't deal with anybody over 18. And then
I don't
have to worry about it.
Maturity and dealing with something at that level, high caliber, I could imagine you would be saying to yourself, well, I want to make sure that everything's cool with this. I don't want to get pinched on this situation. I just want to flow and keep living life. At 15 years young, how much money were you seeing coming in, man? Were you seeing thousands weekly?
It was just getting started when I was 15, but yeah, by 16, I had my own apartment, and it was a couple $100,000. It was a couple $100,000 a year for sure.
That's amazing.
Well, the amazing thing isn't so much the money, and I guess the book kind of reveals, is it allowed me to live a life and accrue a whole bunch of experiences, outside of the drug trade, that just wouldn't be accessible. And yet also some of my more wealthy family friends, they got to fly to Switzerland and stuff on daddy's credit card and stuff, but I was taking, my bros on my own hard-earned cash. So there was a cockiness to it for sure.
This is incredible stuff, Crash. So you're basically one of the big movers and shakers of the marijuana industry, which was making, I couldn't imagine, hundreds of millions of dollars annually, if not billions,
Well,
in the
well,
underground market.
but you got to understand, probably just in Manhattan alone, there were probably hundreds of other operators at my same level.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a big market. And there were people that I knew socially that were sort of in the same place I was, but we never worked together, kind of thing. But so I could see how really big, and the few times I went down to Mexico and to Arizona and stuff to do big trips and see what was going on down there. And you see these trucks just rolling out in every direction.
And this is a time before there was acceptance of it in certain regions totally not accepting, and
right.
like we mentioned, the laws were incredibly stringent, so there was a huge risk if you ever got caught. So that's why this is incredible to think that, to look back.
It seems insane to me now.
It's in my blood, Crash, bro. No doubt, understandable, man. But now listen, this is the stuff that stories are made of, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm saying to everybody out there, please, not condoning selling drugs whatsoever. Please do not. And this is a story from the 1980s that our featured guest and the incredible author and musician Crash Taylor had lived through his experiences. I would never recommend jeopardizing your life, your time in life, if ever getting caught. Just know, though, everybody has a journey, but if that could be an inspiration to y'all living vicariously through Crash's story, where you're reading pot.com and you're like, oh, that's interesting, that's fascinating, cool, you're there, you're on the journey, so you don't got to worry about going out and doing that journey on your own now, right? Live vicariously through a story that right now is blowing my mind, and we're just getting started, Crash. If it's okay, I'm really into this. This is super cool. So, okay, now again, I know I'm from the South Shore of Long Island, from Blue Point, and lived in Pelham Bay later on, working out there in New York. Lived with my aunt. Big shout out to Francesca DeJosia. Okay, big shout out. Now, she gave me a roof over my head where she lives out there. Won't give her location, but down the downtown Manhattan, and and I was always skating all through New York, and from the Hamptons to Brooklyn Banks and all the fun stuff. So that's why I'm a bit savvy to the areas. So just know that's why I'm able to sort of go different directions here a bit. Okay, so you're 15, you're 16, 17, let's say, you're in the tri-state area doing your thing. You're now having your own apartment. Just quick question. Where was the apartment, if I could ask?
In the Village, right? 2 blocks from Washington Square Park.
I mean, we're talking, this is just an amazing area to live, everybody. Okay, if you're ever able to live in an area like this, if you're living in New York City, this is probably one of the best areas to live. I never lived there, but I just love it out there. So now you're, getting a ton of cash flow coming in. When do you start thinking about investing? When does investment happen in your thought process? Now, again, you're 15, 16 starting this. Yeah. You're doing this because you're somebody who didn't grow up with much, and you're just wanting to have a little more than you had. And now you got hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. When does an idea of investment cross your mind?
Well, definitely not till my mid-20s, because before then, and it, while it seems like an outrageous amount of money, anybody who lives in New York knows that $100,000 a year at restaurants is not a problem. You take 4 or 5 friends out 3 nights a week, and I mean, it is not hard to burn through cash. You take a couple of trips.
Not in New York, that's right.
And it's done. Yeah.
So there's a lot to do in New York, and a lot of good steakhouses, a lot of good hummus places. Don't get me
Yeah.
started. St. Mark's got some good stuff. They had a good
Yeah.
hummus place out there. I don't know if it's there.
I think the interesting point for me, I think it was I was 17 and I'd started selling to the Yippies. And I think
Hey,
the FBI had just released tapes of, John Lennon. They were taping him and what they were talking about because they wanted to bring peace on earth and stuff. And then they had a pot parade every year. So I think it was 17 where like, there were trucks and buckets and people just handing out, and it was all my weed.
wow, wow. Now that's fascinating. That's super cool. We had David Peel on our show.
Yeah.
David Peel, big rest in peace, David Peel.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious, he was kind enough early on in 2013 to come on our show when we were first starting out. I played at a place called the Yippee Cafe on Bleecker. And
Yeah.
it was created by A.J. Weberman, or he was working there, I believe it was. So these are
Yeah.
going back to like some of like the people you would know. And then you got like the big time like yippies. I think it was like Abby Hoffman and like some of like the big name like people like David Peel was big name. In terms
He's
of
a pie. He pied Nixon.
yeah.
He's a pie man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had his song, I think it was titled "The Pope Smokes Dope." I think he said on our show it was censored, or they wouldn't play it in like all these countries. This is 1970s. He had a great song called "New York City Hippie" that he did. I remember John Lennon, I think, was on one of the live performances. Super cool. But yippies, I think of David Peel, the great David Peel, the late great David Peel of the Lower East Side, giving credit where credit is due. New York City music, real artistry, somebody who was a true, just like yourself, Crash, a true artist of
Well, what I think what's interesting, and when I started to write the book, one of my thoughts is all of those characters were out of their minds. Like, while I applaud them, some of the ripples they made and some of the work that they did, and certainly the authors. I mean, Kerouac was on the ground, but like Hunter S. Thompson, or so much of the subculture is written from either, and they're out to get us, or I'm special or something. And I was like, I just want to tell a story here. I don't want to like pick sides or rant and rave. And part of that actually developed because I was moving so much marijuana. I couldn't have a very large political footprint. It didn't make sense for my business to go out with a megaphone. So a lot of times I was like with the, there was a big effort in the early 90s, late 80s to get colleges to divest from apartheid, when there was still slavery, the institution of slavery in South America. So,
South Africa.
I wrote some songs and I stood up there, but I supported others who could sort of take more of a major role because I didn't want the pushback to sort of ruin my business. So in some ways, I think I might have been more politically active, but I was sensible enough to realize that you kind of can't do both,
Oh, goodness gracious. And nowadays, Crash, right? You can only imagine nowadays the pushback people get when you're, working to counter whatever narrative is out there, pushed by whoever wants to be heard, yada, yada. So that's very wise of you back then in the 80s, wise behind your years, because, again, this is somebody coming from the lower, the village, Greenwich Village area of New York City. I was going to say the Lower West Side. Is that like to consider the Lower West?
Sure. Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But Greenwich Village. And somebody now who's funding, sort of like power players in terms of whether it's politics, whether it's also technology.
Yeah.
What's going on with technology? And how do you get involved with technology? And do you get into this in the 80s? When do you come across all of this?
So one of the weird things that happens when you have a couple bucks is you just end up getting, sucked into things. I invested in some biomedical research where I lost money, and like if people just come up with ideas. So I wasn't a sucker, but I invested in a couple things. But one of the things I did, somebody was like, "Hey, my company's buying, computers. So, and I can get you one for $250." And at that time, it was pretty early on, what most people probably can't even imagine considering a computer. So yeah, I just kind of had one in my living room and I futzed around, and music thing at first seemed really intriguing. The whole MIDI thing and synthesizers. I kind of got into that for a long time. I sort of shifted back to more acoustic reality in terms of my musical preference. But yeah, just the beauty and the logic flow, which it kind of like writings like that too. I'm like, it all has to connect and roll and be tied together. And computer logic is just so inhuman that there's something satisfying about that for some part of our brain and a part of our lives, you know. It's like, why is it
Yes,
doing that? Because you told it to do that,
totally. And it's interesting because, sort of the technology. Sort of, I was going to ask you, what was your first computer? Do you remember what it was?
I think the brand was Fox, and it was an 8086 chip with a green screen and two disk drives, two
Yeah,
floppy
the
disk
floppy
drives.
drives. Yeah, the big squares. Oh my god, I had a Commodore 64. I had the
Nice.
Commodore 64 in our house, so that
Nice.
that was like changed everything. But
Yeah.
now it's interesting, because technology is so wild.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's so pervasive in people's lives, where, like you said, it's forging. Well, we mentioned, I mentioned what Graham Hancock had pointed out. It's forging this new communication right now, the podcast and all these cool things going on.
Yeah.
But then I mentioned also, there's certain aspects of it that, could for a child's mind. It, it's so fascinating to think about how they're being conditioned by the internet, or by just technology in essence, and what
Well,
the impact
we
is.
are, Einstein was right. The technology is moving faster than our own sort of mental, social evolution. But we're also kind of seeing it, like you and I use cell phones, like, oh, look what they invented. And there's a whole bunch of kids who came up with cell phones. And now we're into like the second generation of kids sort of navigating how that works and how it can help their lives. And there's a lot of negative to say about it. The dopamine pumps, you get from your friend liking you.
Yeah,
So, I think as a society, we have to be careful of that.
yeah.
But there is,
There's
there's a lot of talking
positives.
about,
There's
well, they're talking about it being
positives.
false
Mega.
connection. But if it's a connection that's happening in my brain, I don't care if you're across the world, if we're having a connection, like, so I'm not even sure, we're like such in the beginning of it. I don't feel like I can safely say, but I do know that like the path of evolution and knowledge and the march towards human dignity and freedom and ability for expression, comes and pushes back, but it's going in the same direction. And I don't think the technology is going to all of a sudden be the thing that brings us down. Like, we've had plenty of upheavals, and I'm talking upheavals like in a $4 million year view of like, we didn't,
You're
people
thinking
didn't just
about
wake up.
you're thinking about 1985 and the amount you took in, that 4 million.
Well, it's like, no politician said stop being farmers and move to the cities. That was not anybody's political decision. That's like the biggest change, in humanity. And then, the way that we've moved from, before the Industrial Revolution, there was a whole service class. People worked for the few people that had money, and then factories came, and then we all kind of worked for factories, and nobody ever made the decision that the human social model is going to completely change, right? It happens because of technology. So we're seeing that again with the digital revolution. And, does it ever really land, or how does it land? Or can you say it's 100% good? Probably not ever,
Yeah, that's 100. I like how you say that. How's it going to land? How's this going to play out? And to all your points, yeah, well spoken. So you're now in your 20s. You mentioned,
Yeah.
in terms of technology, when that sort of, or investment, I should say.
Yeah.
How does that sort of come about in terms of funding technology
Well,
or endeavors within what was happening at the time?
no, I mean, I've always really identified with a sort of a punk ethos. Not that I ever like needed to adorn myself with the punk image, but just the fact of a little bit of finger in the air to the man and that kind of thing. So there were a couple of professors in NYU. There were a couple of freaks that were involved in some sort of early early computer stealing scam. There were some just interesting rabble rousers coming out of the 70s and 80s. Like it started in the telcos, like just being able to, have a code to get a free phone call. Like we all had those, and the people who were stealing those were just interested in throwing monkey wrenches in technology. So, buying these people computers and buying them lunch and sort of maybe paying rent for a couple of them to live together to kind of rabble rouse and just push back and just, geek out smoking weed, talking about like, how can we mess with them? Can we backdoor into them? And like, you weren't trying to make any trouble, but mostly against the consumer model that was evolving on the web. A lot of people thought it should be more focused on information, but you won't get the information if there's not a commercial model. So, it was just a pushback on let's not just rush to, there was a time if you Googled something like, the Delaware River, the first few things that would come up would be, interesting facts about the Delaware River. Now, your first few pages are about like canoeing or camping or, products you can buy related to. So, I can't say we won or we helped or whatever, but there was at least some sense, Google has Google Scholar now, where you can actually look at white paper. Like if you're interested in stuff, you can look for that information specifically. So yeah, it was just a fun time, like seeing what you could do and poke around. And while I wasn't like coding or geeking out, like it was super fun to just like throw some money at some of these people and hear what they're doing and inspire them to go out there and do that.
So everybody listening into this, again, you're listening to Crash Taylor. This is episode 156 of the Subjective Perspective Show. And you're hearing about money being thrown at different ideas from somebody who is making a whole lot of money in the underground marijuana industry in New York City during the 1980s. So, moral of the story, there are investors out there. Okay, so there's different ways that they have their revenues. So just know, you keep on knocking, one of those doors is going to open one day. Crash, whoever you funded probably was ecstatic when you funded them. But I got to ask you, like, so because I know the book, delves into this. It delves from what I and where I'm at, and I correct me if I'm wrong. Do you speak a bit more about the technology and who do you put this money to? Let me first ask that. Where is this money going?
Well, I mean, some of it's innocuous as I have a friend who's an artist. He's curious about computers. He's always done the posters for my band. So I buy him a computer. He does that. And, many years later, like he's a very successful, graphic designer, layout person. So some of it was like that, and then some of it was, early on there was a guy who was giving tickets to us kids, like in Washington Square Park, literally like flagging us down and sending us to Honduras to count the CIA airplanes taking off to fly to Nicaragua and Panama. Just sit there all day, drink, and count planes.
Wow.
Yeah, so guys like
so they paid you to do that.
They didn't pay us. They just bought the ticket and we went and sat and we could eat and drink for free. We couldn't really like leave this one little town.
Wow.
But we counted airplanes because this group was trying to get us to stop the illegal wars we were having in South America. So, I found it very satisfying to kind of, pump some money into those people, so they could continue to do that work. After I didn't want to do it, but there was plenty of kids in Washington Square Park who would go do it, So just kind of getting behind.
That's incredible.
Fundraising.
Wow.
And also, I have to say, come back to the money, the investing thing. When I think about saving, this also seems a little crazy to me now, but I'd seen so many people accumulate piles of cash in the illegal trade and either have it stolen or put it on a big trip out of Arizona and lose it to the cops or whatever. I never wanted to accumulate. It wasn't about like accumulating a pile. And in fact, even with all that money, there were a lot of times I spent money before it came in, and I kind of felt there was this karmic connection. If I continue to do good work and help people and be generous to my friends, the money will keep coming. And it really did for a couple of decades.
And just for everybody that is aware of how much it sort of takes in terms of writing a book, that's another aspect that I want to ask you. When did you say, you know what, you want to write a book about all of some of the wildest times in your life, an incredible story in your life? What inspired you to write pot.com?
Well, one thing that's interesting is there will be more books. And because I've had able to accrue so many different experiences, like I talk about the Grateful Dead a little bit and that, but like I don't talk about Danceteria and the Tunnel and the Limelight, Studio 54 and Xenon and like the whole nightclub disco part of my life and all of that sort of interesting social. So it's kind of because I had the money and I didn't have to go to work every day, I could sort of plug in with a bunch of different communities fully invested and have the time to kind of have a bunch of experiences. So when I sit around, I tell stories, people listen to my, and they're like, oh, I love that story. And I was like, okay, let me see if I can make a cohesive thread through it. And obviously, like Hemingway said, you got to live life to be able to write it. So that was the life that I lived. So I'm like, okay, let me put a bunch of stories in sort of one thread through this book and see. I wrestled a bunch with arc, like story arc, like does the character sort of evolve or, all that stuff they tell writers to do. And I was like, actually, it's interesting because I passed through all of this different insanity with kind of really the same voice. Like just, when I think about those days, like it was always Crash, at that party and it was, so just sort of sitting down and letting it flow. And then of course, a lot of editing.
Now, I just want to say, writing a book, so we're going to go back to pot.com, but if you wrote a book about the early days of the Tunnel and all of the clubs you mentioned,
yeah,
because raves were really big in like the 90s, right? So if this was before the raves, just a cool title.
Discos, nightclub.
Disco. Oh, so this is super cool. Something like, I was going to say, think of a title like Before the Rave or something like that. So just yeah. Oh, we want you to write that book. We want you back on the show. Okay. We want you back on regardless. All right. I know we're coming up on the hour here, Crash. Listen, you let me know whenever you got to get cruising. Okay.
Yeah, no, I got time.
Cool. So I'll be mindful. I have a couple set questions towards the end, but I want to explore just a bit more of pot.com, a bit of your music, and then we'll get into the final couple questions. So thank you for your time today. And this is why I dig the podcast, because you get some really, really cool conversations with people, and you just sort of vibe in and you get fascinated with the world around you in a way that you feel like you're growing. So that's how I feel. Like when I'm hearing these ideas, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm like, oh, this is super cool. So back to pot.com. Correct me if I'm wrong now, because I'm maybe sort of midway in. I believe you're going to get towards the idea of investment, of how that money is invested.
Yeah. Not so much personally, but I definitely, I get into how the money ended up with certain companies. And I mean, the craziest thing is, selling Cisco Kid weed in 1991 was the whisper campaign to buy Cisco, one of the first big IPOs. And then in 1995, we're selling Yahoo and Excite, two different kinds of kind bud. And of course, Excite nobody knows about, but Yahoo's still around. So it was the ploy was people want to be in the know. Let's give them something to know about. So through some bankers and lawyers and brokers, the word was out like, hey, buy this stock, here's the weed you're smoking, buy this stock. So it was really kind of an adventurous plan to just try to pump not just the money that we were accumulating, but like everybody else's money into this sort of same funnel. But and it's interesting because that's interesting, and the drug business, and I threw that in, but I think we're all on our own journey in life, and it's all about just finding out really if we're successful by the end of our journey, we come to a place hippies would call love, right? Some universal understanding and acceptance and feeling a connection to the universe and to other people. So I think that book is a real journey from, this cocky young kid who had the world at his hands and was willing to stick the finger up to to the man, just as part, that's what you do. To sort of a deeper understanding of relationships and how we kind of exist together and what that, might mean.
It's so funny you say that, Crash. So you mentioned the hippie aspect and love and the word universal. So I got to give a huge shout out to the Universal Love family and Normal Being up there in Springfield, Oregon, the Hippie Museum. Crash, George Walker, who was one of the Love family, he was the original Merry Prankster. So he created the bus. His name was hardly visible in the electric Kool-Aid acid test written by Tom Wolfe. And his best friends was Ken Kesey and Neil Cassidy also before he passed away. And he talks all about it on our show, but we did a tour with them in 2019, all from the Oregon, all the way down to the deserts and Santa Cruz. And my incredibly brilliant and beautiful wife Lisa and myself were a music duo, as well as having the talk show. We actually started the music about 3 years before we started the talk show. So that's why you said that's like what hippies really would
well, and it's funny because
love.
I couldn't have lived my life if those loudmouths, in the positive way, I love them all, weren't out there shouting in this huge subculture scene. And like, in the Grateful Dead, like kind of really continued it for a while. So I was able to do what I was doing without attracting any attention. It's like the 80s were so awesome because of all the people who got arrested and beat up in the 60s and the 70s, right? They were the ones who earned us the freedoms that we could experience in the 80s and 90s. And while I don't always appreciate their tactics, like their hearts and their writings, definitely are revolutionary. And that's the other thing. When I was writing the book, I said, like, a lot of that is hard for mainstream to sort of swallow or accept. And one of the things I wanted to put out in the book is like, yes, I was insane to think I was okay to do what I was doing, but I wasn't like totally destructive or abusive or it's just a different time now. Like subculture means a different thing. Like, to that whole LBGT thing, right? They don't have to be beating up cops at in the bars or whatever. They've sort of found their place and their voice. And sort of the same thing in the book. Like, it doesn't have to be militant and wasted and overdosed and all of those things that so many of our idols in the 60s and 70s who really did change the world were. And I mean, I love John Lennon, but you read some of his works and it's like when the most brilliant blazing poet ever didn't walk the path of self-actualization very far, like in terms of his own person and his own understanding, sort of all of that other pressure. And it's amazing to me that he could write those songs and have that meaning that, all of us feel and share. But yet his journey personally, not only was it cut short, but it was, it's strange, the whole getting to know.
Isn't it interesting? Crash, it's fascinating because no doubt what you're saying, it crosses my mind in so many ways. And I want to introduce you, if I can, to my little, I'm going to make this point because he's right here. I gotta get him on video. Everybody listening, I'm going to get our little guy, Jerry. Let me put the mic down for a second. Hold on. Big shout out. Yeah, Crash. Yeah.
All right. Is it dog time?
Yeah, listen, the reason I did that because he never gets airtime. And I'm about to say something, which is the reason I set the stage there with that, because, the idea that, sort of, just emanating from love, it's something that's rooted in perhaps what goes beyond us, to talk about self-actualization.
Sure.
Like the top of like Maslow's hierarchy if you're familiar with this
Sure.
hierarchy of needs, is like self-actualization. For everybody listening in, I won't go too deep into it, though, at the bottom is sort of your basic needs, and it sort of just elevates, and it's in a pyramid form, and the top is self-actualization. So when you said that, it made me feel like I want to mention this about love, because I think self-actualization really emanates from love in ourselves. I think when we are able to love those beyond us as well. Like I just brought in little Jerry, our little pumpkin. No one's ever seen him much other than pictures. So Crash, this is a great convo interview. So I had to do it on your episode. All right, man. So hopefully like people will check it out even more so. They see a great author and musician here. They're like, yo, and little Jerry's on that thing too. This is crazy. But I put that out there because some people would measure self-actualization with just book smarts, and that does not have to be the case. That is not the case.
No,
Self-actualization.
in my own personal experience, uh, I strove very hard in my late teens and early 20s to sort of grasp some different cosmologies and study some theology, and was learning some 7 of these Buddhist things and 3 of those Buddhist things and the 11 things over here and the
Got a little Buddha
Sephiroth.
right there too, so that's cool. We're saying that right now. Got a little Buddha statue, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting because I guess sometime probably on an acid trip in my early 30s, I realized that all of that monkey mind, all of that trying to understand the intellectual construct of something that no human has ever actually understood, right? Because it's beyond us. I'm actually kind of wasting my time and really actually just connecting a trail of smiles throughout the day. Like I feel like when I make people smile at the post office, I'm like, I just did more than any politician could do. It's like I just brought a real change into somebody's life, and how to sort of just exercise that in the greatest way. And all the bells and whistles and incense and stained glass and iconography all represents a thing that's within us. So let's just operate from the thing within us. And I found that was love. And I could start to trust what was coming out of my mouth more and more because I knew it was coming from a place rooted in respect and gratitude.
That's what it's about. I love that you're saying this because it's refreshing. That really is what it's all about.
Yeah.
I really believe that, in order for us to, reach that point of self-actualization that we were talking about, we have to see in ourselves, first, the fact that we are all works of art. No, we are not perfect from the start, but though within us already is the masterpiece. And every day we're just chipping away at it. So as time goes on and we're doing the right things, we're leaving those smiles on people's faces as we leave them into our personal bank account, as I think it was Stephen Covey talked about, and we're just doing those good things, or maybe we're in classes, maybe we're investing, maybe we're writing books and writing music, or whatever it is you're doing in your life. That all leads to the feeling of inspiration within. And then when we have that feeling of inspiration, we have the ability to see in ourselves, dang, I am love. And then, like, I brought little Jerry on because he is like just a little love in our life. That allows us to love others with greater conviction universally, in a way where we see, when we're self-actualized, the greatness in everybody, because we know in our journey we weren't always who we were, and we are always constantly working at who we are. I'm, by any stretch of the imagination, perfect. I know many of you are like, wait a second, Nick.
Well, it's interesting too, because and I think in embracing of it's such an overworked used word these days, but diversity. If I see somebody dressed a certain way, I'm going to tend to be thankful for them to making my day a little less boring. as opposed to being like, what the hell are they thinking? Or, what do they connect with? Or they're against me, or they're different from me. I'm just thankful to see, all the different letters in the alphabet soup or whatever.
And you are, as to bring it sort of full circle, from one of the most diverse regions in the world, Greenwich Village,
Yeah.
from its onset. It's for everybody who is wondering, well, maybe your region of the world is not as diverse in your community, because New York City obviously is
Yeah.
so obviously it's New York City. I won't even go into it.
Although we come back to technology and the world is so flat now that people are getting exposed to everything all over. Yeah. So I was talking to some young people, like teenagers, the other day, and they were from a couple different schools, a few in the city, a few rural. And I was asking them about cliques. When I was sort of in school, you identified as either like a geek or a head or a stoner or an athlete or jock, whatever. And it seems like a lot of those are really blurring. And I think the work of, like, the LGBT crowd and Black Lives Matter, the effect of it on kids was really kind of revolutionary. I mean, I don't know if the laws are going to catch up. We're going to really get a bunch of solutions happening, but just what I'm seeing in the kids, the level of acceptance. And, there's one school kids were from where there weren't that many races, but like the kids all kind of seemed real proud that they had a few Asians and a Black kid, and they, they weren't put out, they were like totally welcomed, as opposed to, kind of being shunned, which I think, in previous decades, it would have been more difficult, for that kind of thinking. And some of that is the technology, they're just getting exposed to it,
Yeah, and and you said it so well, Chase. Crash, I apologize. I was going to make the point that when we think about the landscape that has been flattened regarding communication and how technology brings us together, we can meet out. And I was going to say, and then you got in there, and I was going to say, coming to the chase. I apologize for the chase came in. Crash, I apologize.
Yep.
This is why the world has changed indefinitely from when you and I were young. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating because I believe that the way we end things like any of the isms, right? Anything that would be racism, sexism, whatever it may be, right? Listen, never going to totally end it, because it seems as though humans are always populating and it's based upon ignorance. So you may have ignorant people at a stage in their life that, okay, they may exhibit, terrible, ideas, behaviors. Now, exposure, that in one word is how you cure this aspect of the isms. It could be any ism, like I mentioned. When we're exposed to one another, when we talk with one another, like we were saying earlier, being from New York, it didn't matter what religion you were, what culture you were, what anything you were, right?
Although I do have to say, so I was raised in an interracial family. My parents adopted interracial. I have a younger Black sister, so we would go out, and I was always really hyper conscious of the difference. Just to speak male and female, right? I could get in any car, or go down any alley, or go to any club, by myself, and feel pretty okay about it. Whereas a woman would have a very different kind of experience, security issues in some of those conditions. But then also her being, Black. So I've always been really conscious of the social armament I was born into this world with. If my sister walked into a room with a smile and started to talk, she would have a very different reaction if I walk into a room and smile and start to talk. So I've always really understood that I mean, I say it blessed, whatever, but it's a lot of the challenges of sort of being recognized and respected. So much of that has been heaped on, tall white men who speak English, that I've tried to not take, take advantage of that and always be really conscious in other settings of like, oh, if you're not 6 feet tall, or you're have a different body shape or a different skin complexion, like when you walk into a room. So, and I'm using a room as an example, but I've always tried to really usher those voices in, partially, I don't, what do they call it, like liberal, heartache, or, I don't know if I'm, giving it up, but I am very conscious of the fact that because American tall, reasonable shape male,
Just
I am
say
out.
you're good looking, Crash. You're a good looking gentleman.
I never, no, I just, but it's true. It's like, it's actually, I have to be really tight with it because it's a form of violence, actually, right? To enter in, to use their armaments. They're just like guns or something, right? I can walk into, and you can use those weapons for good or not. But yeah, it's a grossly unfair world. And I feel lucky, I'm not like saying I'm like honored and everybody should, but anyway, my path through life has been eased with less security issues and less acceptance issues than, a lot of people are presented with. And so you're talking about isms and biases, and we have to change our own thinking about these things. Why isn't a 50-year-old woman as authoritative as I am? I could be talking about something I don't even know about, and chances are out there in the viewer world, people are going to go with what I'm saying just because I'm a freaking dude, so yeah, how do we get past that? I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you this, and that's where I bring it back. And I just want to say thank you for sharing all of that as well, Crash. Super cool to learn more about you. For your fans, for those that may be out on our side, checking us out, and now they're learning about Crash Taylor. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is episode 156 of the Subjective Perspective Show here. And we've been on for a bit over an hour. So I'm going to bring us down the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So, Crash, thank you for your time. And I just also, again, I just want to say, yes, I mean, it's so important that people realize that everybody, right? We're all part of this, human family, the human race, right?
Yeah.
And in being part of that family, we all want to be good to one another. You know what I'm saying? Like, just like you want to be good to your brothers and sisters, right? Or whatever, want to be good. Just look at everybody as like brothers and sisters. And I know, listen, I don't, not to bring it full circle, not to bring it not off on tangent again, say hippie world, but not to be too like, feeling far out, but geneticists even show through genetic markering that you can trace us back to modern day Tanzania. And they actually did, Spencer Wells did this on like a National Geographic piece. And, cotton swabs actually in Queens, they did it because there's so many bloodlines over there. It was great. And,
Sure.
they will able to do the genetic markering and track us and realize really we're all descendants from, this ancestral tribe in modern day Tanzania. It's
The Rift Valley. Yeah.
it's gorgeous stuff. So when we see, and I know some of us get super wrapped up in, uh, just whatever source of media we take in. But if we just take a second, like I was saying before, sort of, unplug from whatever source of information you're from, readpot.com. So you have new sources of information and, realize that, we're all, we're all really in this thing together. We're all one. Like the great Robert Nesta Marley, One Love. Don't start me with Bob Marley now. I won't go too deep into that. Yeah, I'll start singing right now, Crash. Then it'll really get crazy today.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, and Marx said a lot. Marx and Engels wrote, many tons of volumes. You can probably find anything, support any point of view from some of their writings, but they talk about the death of scarcity. And someday, I bet within this century, we're going to wake up and realize everybody's had breakfast. And what that does, coming back to the mango tree, right? So I'm defending my mango tree, my crew, your crew, right? If there's plenty of mangoes, if everybody's had breakfast, how long is that going to take us to socially evolve from, because so much of our biases and isms and all of that comes down to security issues and self-identification, and it all really boils down to scarcity.
Hmm.
So if
This,
everybody has breakfast, am I going to be as greedy, or am I going to be worried about myself, or, it'll be interesting.
fascinating. Does this come through in the music?
Yeah, it's interesting because in music, I mean, writing is writing for me, and writing songs has two aspects. One, it gives you the ability to add melody, which can transmit emotion, which is amazing. But then it also, you kind of only get a couple of lines. It's closer to, poetry in that sense, because you're trying to take this, really big idea and get in a few lines, like share this concept. And, I've written 1,000 songs, and I guess maybe 1 in 10 might come close to capturing, words are so limited anyway in terms of expressing ideas and images, and I exercise my vocabulary to try to be specific. But even then, what I'm transmitting could be very different from what you're receiving. So yeah, it's just a challenge to.
That's a great point. And I think people have to be aware of that, and aware of the way that we communicate. I mean, for everybody listening in, again, the reason I love doing this show, Crash, the reason I love doing this, and we only do episode once every 2 months now. When we started, it was every Friday for like 2 years. But I love gaining perspective and sharing perspective with the world. We've had people on of all different genres and fun stuff, all the good stuff. And that's why you contribute brilliantly to the multitude of perspectives that we've had on the show, where, you could, again, it's just wonderful to have you on. We want you back on. I'm being
Cool.
mindful of the time. I'm going to give us 9 minutes. I'll take us right to 1:30.
Okay.
And I can't thank you enough for your time today, Crash. What a joy. Trust me, I can go off on everything you just said. I'll be here till 1:25 tomorrow talking about this. I mean, it was.
Yeah. No,
I got
Steve.
so much to say, but I want your perspective to be the perspective that's the predominant perspective, quite honestly, as I round us off, so we can leave the audience with your viewpoint, or just a perspective how it ties in a bit to you as an individual who's creating a beautiful book, a fabulous book titled pot.com. And we'll ask in a bit where everybody could find it. Well, I already know we did that on Amazon, but I'm going to give a follow-up at the very end, about 8 minutes. Now, Crash, one last question with music. You just put out a new song, I believe it was, or was it an entire album? I apologize if it was an album.
Yeah, the album comes out next week, but released a couple of singles leading up to try to generate some traction. Because basically, even though I've been doing it my whole life, I am a new artist. So, we're just really out trying to get started here.
Well, just know this. For many episodes, up until the last maybe 10 episodes, we haven't had intro or outros. We've actually been just doing just the straight interviews. Though we'll probably get back to intros and outros. We give it some time, and we're getting a feel for it. So when we do our music, when we pop back on, would love to put your music on, and maybe even have you back on to talk about the music, so we could talk more about the music. So this is more about a bit of you, a bit of the writing aspect, which, again, there's so much more to talk about, the actual the process of what you went through to write, though. The storyline. Now when people read pot.com, they're going to take with them everything you just said, and the fascinating stories that you have just shared. Oh, Crash, that was incredibly wild. Just to go on that journey with you during this interview, and to get a sense of, well, hey, here's a young person, a teenager, moving 35 pounds of ganj through New York, and just oh my goodness. Again, my disclaimer, again, we don't want you all doing selling no drugs. Don't be doing those drugs. You just take good care of yourself. But remember, I'm nobody to tell anybody because you all are autonomous in what you do. So if I have the ability to be impressionable and be an inspiration to anybody in any way, I would say living vicariously through great books like pot.com again.
A little
Safer
safer.
safer. I was just going to say it. Safer way to go. Focus on your dream. Focus on what you want to be, what you want to do. Eat it, live it, be it. And you're going to see you'll get there a lot faster if you don't deviate off of some paths that could take you down journeys that could be arduous. It may not be able to get you where you want to get to. Okay. So just know, Crash, as I'm pointing, I think you're to this side of me on this window here on the video
Okay.
screen. This is an artist that you want to stay connected to. And these last two questions, Crash, are questions I ask everybody. Every single person on our show have answered these two questions. Just Graham Hancock, as I mentioned earlier, out of all people I mentioned again, hasn't answered the one question, which I hopefully let the cat out of the bag when I said that, dealing with a very simple question. So I'm going to ask you that question in a moment. But the first question I'm going to ask, if any, what are your favorite books and authors or directors and movies? If there's or take either just a movie or
Well, I enjoy movies. I'm not a buff. I will say I was in a conversation the other day with some intense movie people who were talking about great actors and great roles and people who really play, and they were all sort of Broadway, theater people. And after listening for about 45 minutes, and I said, we got to give it up for Robert Downey because Iron Man nailed it.
Yeah,
So
Robert Downey Jr. I grew up with Robert Downey Jr.
They all agreed, I mean, like in terms of building a character, anyway, that's about all I have to say about movies. But books,
cool. That's cool.
I love John Steinbeck. Just that perspective he has, one of my favorite lines ever, which I always think of, especially when I'm in a psychedelic state holding my guitar, is the guitars played like demons, conscious of their power, yet yielding to a higher power. And it's really powerful because I see so many people, and we see so many people like in the entertainment world, taking ownership of these little vibrations they're sending out into the universe, and as if it's really just about their image. I don't know, without going too nutty, I feel like every time I make a noise and open up with any seriousness, I know the universe is listening, and I'm creating the future with these little ripples that I'm putting out and these little love tidbits of songs. That's what's shaping the world. I don't want to take myself too seriously, but I take it very seriously. So sometimes, I just want people to really have more of an understanding of the power of these vibrations and kind of what we can do and take ownership of, yeah, if you want to talk about gangbangers and bitches, you are shaping the world, so if it works for your wallet, that's really great. But I have trouble resonating with that kind of energy in terms of creating a more beautiful planet to eat chocolate on.
Absolutely outstanding ideas presented. And I want to say this. You mentioned John Steinbeck, and that quote was amazing. Well, just yesterday, my mother-in-law, who is in town, which is super cool, from the New York area, and my wife, Lisa TSP, and myself, we were over in Steinbeck country in Salinas, where Steinbeck was born and raised. I do a lot of good work out there, actually, and know a lot of good people out there in Salinas. And it's where all the books were written. Well, I don't know if all the books, but I know Grapes of Wrath and The Pearl and just a lot of the greats. So there's the Steinbeck Museum, Crash. I think it's the only museum dedicated to just one person that's I guess funded through, I don't know if that's just true for California or if that's throughout the country, but whatever, they get some kind of funding where, it's really cool. But Steinbeck was Uh, again, one of the great American authors. So that quote, and the fact that you mentioned that, we just drove past his house that he grew up in the other day, like yesterday
Amazing.
it was.
Yeah.
So that's just crazy that you mentioned that. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, we were on Cannery Row in Monterey. So one of his big books, Cannery Row.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's yeah, this was all meant to be. The whole way through I'd known it, but I'm just a little more cherry on top, little cherry on top. And what's cool is this, like you talk about the image thing, and I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying, Crash. That's why, like, I had like this little like situation, little cut, little nick, which got like a little like irritated. And that's when, it happened a couple of days ago, and I was like, man, it doesn't even matter what people really see, because it's the ideas that are going to be what live on. The ideas are going to impact the minds of those that are tuning on in. And you, yeah, you're aware. Your stories, which I cannot wait to finish, pot.com, which if I can try to reach on over, let me step up. I'm going to actually put this full screen here. Give me 1 second as I step on my little wire here. Now I have my book. Ladies and gentlemen, pot.com, Tales of a Retired Outlaw. And that is the great Crash Taylor right here with us. Episode 156 of the Subjective Perspective Show. Now, Crash, I have one more question for you. And then a quick word association game that'll take 30 seconds.
Okay.
I give you 4 words. I've been doing it the past 10 episodes or so. So it's pretty cool. I just try to get a couple of these word association pieces. It's interesting to hear them. This question, I've already started saying it earlier, and I apologize about that, though it's probably the most simple question that I could come up with back in 2013 when I started asking this. And once I started, I didn't want to change the trajectory that we're on. So this question is simple, but I think it evokes so much within somebody when they think about, hey, I connect with that person. Like, it's just an interesting concept from why people also have what their feeling is on this question. Question is, Crash, final question of our interview here for episode 156. What is your favorite, if any, color or colors, and why?
So I mentioned in the book, I went to Bronx Science, pretty academic high school. I guess I would answer that saying the Mandelbrot set.
Hey, I graduated Lehman College.
Nice.
Right down,
nice.
I think right down the road from Bronx Science. Am I right? Yeah. Am I right with that?
Lehman, yeah.
I graduated there, 07. So for everybody listening in. Oh, that's great.
Evolving color. Yeah.
I like how you said that too. That's awesome. So now listen, Crash, super cool. And like, it's really cool that leaving college. That's really cool because started at home. Say it again.
It's the neighborhood.
Yeah, it is the neighborhood. That is the neighborhood. I have so much more to talk to you about. So let me just be mindful of our time. Though we'll get you back on. All right.
Right.
If you enjoyed this interview convo, we're just getting started, and cool. be an honor to have you back on. So thank you, brother. Crash, last question. It's a word association game, and so it's really not even a question. I'm going to throw 4 words out to you, and whatever first comes to mind. All right, it could be a 1 word or it could be a phrase, whatever it is. So I want to I'll give you 4 words that we have here for you. So just the first word or phrase that comes to mind, you just throw it on now. First word, writing.
Expression, feeling, emotion.
Cool. Very good. I like, yeah. Thank you for Keeping it concise. I appreciate that. Second word. The Bronx.
Well, the D train comes to mind first because I spent an hour each way every morning getting to school, high school and back. And then the second thing is, there are beaver in Van Cortlandt Park.
Oh, hey now. I used to work over by Van Cortlandt, not far from Horace Mann.
Well, somehow some beavers came from upstate somewhere, got in there, and in New York, you're not allowed to kill beavers, so they're making a pond, and like we as humans had to figure out how to accommodate these beavers in Van Cortlandt Park.
Wow.
And I think when I see those moments of humanity making room, I get really excited.
That's all. Oh, Van Cortlandt's a great park too. Right,
For
right by
sure.
the 1-9, the end by 242nd, I think it is. And yeah, I worked over 231st, over by Broadway over there. So yeah, we have a lot of interesting, like cool connections, man. Yeah,
Yeah,
digging this interview convo big time. And
cool.
just yeah, down the road when we get to the East Coast, maybe we'll do something live in person.
Right.
We'll do something cool. Well, hey, listen, I'm keeping you way too long here. Let me stop this now. Two more words. Two more words. Third word. Music.
Peace, joy. Yeah, music for me has always been like very therapeutic. Even when I'm not trying to mash something into an actual song, like I'll just sit and strum and word associate. I don't know, somehow I end up feeling better. So I don't know, it's kind of everything, especially since, the whole universe is just little vibrating strings of stuff, making it all seem like it's solid reality. And music is just that. It's just the vibration, just like how do you feel and what do you want to express.
I'm gonna throw a quote out there because you said vibration of music. Kerouac said once, I think it was in Desolation Angels, the only meaning is the only meaning is without meaning. The only truth is music. Music blends with the universal heartbeat, and we forget the brain beat. What you just said made me think of that, and I concur. I agree with you, Crash. That's cool.
One of
Final
the reasons.
word. Sorry,
Okay, good.
sorry, brother.
Sorry.
No, you go. Take me away. Take me away.
I always really identified with Kerouac for that same reason that a whole bunch of the other sort of hippie subculture, drug culture writers I didn't respect. Like he didn't make a big, like he was just writing and was just caught up in a thing. He didn't make a big deal about what he was doing or like wave a flag or sort of insist like, yeah, just shared. Aldous Huxley, similar, like shared, very sort of rational psychedelic experience that didn't go on with all this other stuff that people assign to that.
The image driven stuff. All
Yeah.
the image driven stuff. I think Jack couldn't even deal with the publicity, the notoriety, was something that sort of ate at him. And from what I had understood a bit, sort of impacted him. And that may have contributed to a lot of his feelings and the alcoholism, which is really inevitably what got him at 47, October 21st, 1969. Gosh. Well, let's go another hour and a half. Van Cortlandt Park. Jack was at Horace Mann. Before doing prerequisites, don't start me now. We gotta start. We'll start from there next time. Okay, we'll start from there next time. That's what I'll carry on. Final word, my friend. Final word, Crash. Family.
Community.
Yeah. Ladies and you said last there, right there. I apologize.
No, I mean, it's like, family is not blood. It's not a household. It's not. It's a village. It's the global village.
Beautiful, beautiful, brother. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 156 of the Subjective Perspective Show. Guest featuring the one and only Crash Taylor. Crash, you mentioned Amazon is where everybody can find the book.
Yeah.
Music as well. And is there a website or anything else that you want to direct our audience to?
Sure. Crash-Taylor.com.
That's TAYLOR.
Correct. I got a bunch of writing and some poetry and stuff up there, but yeah, the music's all everywhere, Spotify and Amazon, I Apple and everything else. So yeah, it shouldn't be hard to find.
We'll be promoting you on our side. We'll be following you on our side. And ladies and gentlemen, we want you all to do the same thing. Like we mentioned earlier, live vicariously through these incredible stories, such as what you are reading within, what we will read within pot.com, and the music by Crash Taylor, which we'll talk about down the road on the show as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know how we do it. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we hope you all go into your week and weekend a bit more thoughtful with a subjective perspective. We're going to see you all soon. Crash, you could stick with me for a hot second, and I'm going to stop the recording here. We'll get this all finalized. But every one of you, listen to the words of Crash Taylor. Be inspired by these ideas and get out there and get yourself pot.com, Tales of a Retired Outlaw, because this is the book that you need to read right now. See you all soon enough. Ciao.